Greetings, friends of liberty. Were you aware? Did you know? Are you cognizant of the fact that every single problem facing humanity, at any given level of historical knowledge, whether we find ourselves in the depths of the Dark Ages or presently in 2025, can be solved by more effectively protecting property rights? That's right. Hard to believe, but true. Every single problem, even anti-Semitism and the violence that can accompany it. Shall I illustrate? Number one, in all mass shootings, whether anti-Semitic or otherwise, throughout the West, it's much more common for the municipality or region in which the crime occurs to have gun control laws, which of course violate the right to self-defense of all responsible citizens. As Second Amendment scholar John Lott famously points out, 94% of all mass shootings that involve 4 or more people occur in gun-free zones, which is one reason, among others, why he wrote a book entitled More Guns, Less Crime, because there are likely millions of defensive uses of guns in America annually. So mass shooters are crazy, but they're not stupid. They don't want to be killed, or at least be killed before they've killed lots of innocents. So they choose to commit crimes in areas which prevent or forbid the possession of firearms, meaning gun-free zones are actually hunting preserves for sociopaths, which liberal societies deliberately create. Do you imagine that James Holmes, who went into a movie theater in Colorado in 2012, killing 12 and injuring 70, didn't know that it was a gun-free zone? What else would one expect in Colorado? Now, Australia, as we know among others from its totalitarian approach to COVID, is a very liberal country, so it's no surprise that Australia has stringent federal and local gun control laws. In this sense, the whole country is a hunting ground for mass murderers, because the citizenry have already been largely disarmed. And so, when Islamic State members Sajid and Naveed Akram on December 14th took out their hunting rifles and started murdering Jews who were celebrating Hanukkah on the beach in Bondi, not one of hundreds of citizens in the immediate vicinity had a gun to give return fire. Not a single Australian. That's sure a different impression of Australian toughness and independence than you get from watching Paul Hogan in Crocodile Dundee. Very different. The only recourse left to their citizens was to attack the riflemen by throwing bricks, and in the heroic case of former policeman Ahmed Al-Ahmed, bull-rushing one of the attackers and disarming him, while being shot himself, as others who tried to help were fatally. But what do you imagine this former policeman, or the brick thrower, or many others could have done instead if they had had a firearm? Number two. Now, I just said that not a single Australian at Bondi had a gun, but by that, of course, I meant private Australians. What did the government and the police do? In this case, the police apparently responded adequately, shooting both murderers, one fatally. 2 officers were shot during the exchange of gunfire. However, in numerous other instances, police in America have responded in a dilatory or even cowardly manner, failing to engage the shooters in some cases for over an hour. Uvalde, Texas, in 2022, where a whole squad of policemen stood around for 77 minutes, allowing many students and teachers to be murdered at a public elementary school. Columbine High School in 1999, police waiting over a half hour for a SWAT team to arrive as the shooter killed again and again. Binghamton, New York in 2009, where officers waited for 40 minutes. At the Pulse nightclub in Orlando in 2016, where officers waited apparently over an hour. In Parkland, Florida in 2018, where officers again failed to enter the building for close to an hour. And in Thousand Oaks, California, also in 2018, where they waited over 40 minutes. Note, of course, that if private citizens in these areas, such as the teachers or others themselves, had been allowed to carry weapons, they could have engaged the shooters very quickly. As, for example, did the security guard in 2019 at the West Freeway Church of Christ in Texas when he killed the shooter. What are some of the reasons for these cowardly police responses? One is undoubtedly the strength of public sector police unions, which make it hard for officers to be dismissed or lose their pensions as a result of bad behavior. In other words, the laws are used to violate the rights of citizens by privileging members of police unions to not have to face the consequences of their cowardly actions. The same general bad behavior can be found among other American public sector unions, such as teachers' unions, where in America firing a bad public school teacher often costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and many months or years of hearings. Number 3, a third rights violation is more subtle but more fundamentally damaging because it permeates all societal institutions and yet generally is not recognized. And that is, as I've discussed in many videos on this channel, the fact that since World War II in the 60s, higher education in the West has been overwhelmingly funded and controlled by government, unlike it was previously to World War II. And even lower education, too, since the beginning of the 20th century and later also increasingly controlled by the federal government through the Department of Education. And all that public funding and control has directly led to these institutions of education becoming the creators and distributors of many bad ideologies, with which they infect the minds of young people. Trans ideology, man-hating feminism, the socialism and even Marxism of AOC and Zoran Mamdani, radical green ideology, woke ideology, dislike and even hatred of the West, and last but not least, anti-Semitism. It's no surprise that Harvard and many other elite colleges taking huge amounts of federal grants have, for the last half-century, increasingly indoctrinated their students with anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiments, along with all the other aforementioned ideologies. But have private Catholic schools ever taught kids about he, him, they, them, sie, them, zir? Are you kidding? The parents wouldn't stand for it. That's the point, and why these Catholic schools are more rational. The parents are controlling the content of the curriculum, but not in public ed. There, the bureaucrats, administrators, and professors standing either don't give a damn or are for he, him, they, them, sie, them, zir. So one of the greatest blows against anti-Semitism in the long run in the West would be to privatize all lower and higher public education. It would be an enormous positive for that and other reasons. Number 4. Note that religions like Christianity and Islam are some of the greatest propagators of anti-Semitism for 2 basic reasons. First, partly because religions are a conspiracy of self-deception. And if you're not in on it, in other words, not a believer, you're more likely to be regarded as an enemy because you haven't committed yourself to go along with all their supernatural fictions. But partly as well, the religion of modern Muslims is constantly protected and funded by their respective states. And that state protection intensifies the violence against anyone who points out just how stupid and irrational Mo, Allah, and the Quran can be. Note that until very recently, Jews have never had a state to use to cram their religion down other people's throats, unlike Christians and Muslims. A state has the power to privilege the believers of whatever doctrines it teaches to act more and more irrationally. Think Nazi Germany. But a religion, shorn of its state support, all other things being equal, will be, or at least act, more rationally. So one of the prime causes of anti-Semitism in the world is the Muslim state support violating the rights of citizens of Islam. Remove that, and over time there would be far fewer Islamic Jew haters. Number 5. I would argue that the rise of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism on the right, espoused most notably by the likes of Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, and others, is a response, a reaction to the identity politics, institutional racism, and collectivism found on the left. So it went like this. The left, for a half-century, created its own bigoted beliefs and tribal politics in governmental institutions like schools, and also by its affirmative action racism, supported by the anti-discrimination statutes of the American Civil Rights Acts. And the right has responded to that. So while the left, for decade after decade, played racial, gender, and tribal politics with everyone, canceling, shaming, firing, excluding, and destroying lives, the right in the end responded with their own heightened identity politics. Given the hatred of masculinity found so often on the left, and given the blatant bigotry of colleges and businesses' affirmative action programs, and given the hatred of the best of Western civilization, which few colleges dare defend anymore, it's not surprising that so many of the young men who rejected the woke and gender ideology of the left ended up with their own bigoted, MAGA, Christian nationalist and fascist ideology, embracing Andrew Tate, Adolf Hitler, and typecasting Churchill as the prime villain of World War II. So in summary, the public education system created the bigoted ideologies of the left, and the right created their own in response. Number 6. A somewhat minor and more indirect cause of bigotry and racism in general, and anti-Semitism in particular, is the right's violations of the welfare state. Stealing money from one group of taxpayers to just give to others has quite a surprising and destructive effects on people's belief systems. So, for example, since Britain offers the incentives of a huge welfare state to immigrants, it's not surprising that many anti-Semitic Pakistanis come from Pakistan and go right on welfare, with the average unemployment rate in 2024 of Pakistanis being 11.1% and white Brits 3.3%. And so, do we imagine the Pakistanis will be more or less likely to give up their relatively misogynistic, anti-Western, and anti-Semitic beliefs from the old country when they're sitting there collecting their welfare checks? And if they're not working, they won't have to integrate with British society or surrounding communities. And if they have lots of babies, then the state in effect pays the parents to hand down their anti-Semitism to the kids too. But would any major British politician imagine abolishing the welfare state? Turning to America, the same phenomenon is found. Blacks in the U.S. get more welfare than any other ethnic group, and while comprising 13% of the population, receive 30% of temporary assistance for needy families, 21% of Medicaid, and 29% of those in the SNAP program. And, not at all surprisingly, they are more racist, commit more hate crimes, and are more anti-Semitic than other ethnic groups. In contrast, Asian Americans, comprising about 7% of the population, commit only 1% of all hate crimes, and not surprisingly, get less welfare per capita than other ethnic groups. Is this correlation also causation? Very likely, to a degree. 7. Finally, the suggestion by objectivist Yaron Brook that the West should focus intensively on eliminating ISIS, an obviously rights-violating organization, is likely correct, but one wonders, for example, how seriously an Australian government that recognized the Palestinian state, and not 4 years ago was filled with woke elites, bureaucrats, and politicians, will take seriously the necessity for tracking ISIS enrollment and activity in Australia. Hopefully this would be more successful than asking British police to prosecute grooming gang rapes, which indicates in these cases the destructive effects of an entire police force and judiciary afraid of being called racist, all caused by an educational system and set of equality acts that motivate anti-white and anti-Semitic bigotry. In conclusion, do you want to eliminate or reduce anti-Semitism? Protect property rights more. I wish you all a joyous holiday season and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.